The Wolfenstein reboot is comprised of two profoundly unapologetic games. They do not do a single thing to look away from their subject matter, which can make them feel grim and dark and desperate. The reboot tells the story of an alternate history, one where the Nazis won World War II, and shows just how bleak the world gets under the new regime. Wolfenstein takes a clear stance on the matter, a stance that I'd argue is meant to be entirely uncontroversial, but the central reason why, I imagine, we might not ever get another game in the series. Wolfenstein hates Nazis. The politics of the first game in the reboot duology, Wolfenstein: The New Order, are incredibly simple. The game makes it explicitly clear what we must do with Nazis, that there is no role fascism can play in our future other than to be stomped under our boots. It's a political perspective that seems largely uncontroversial at face value. Nazis have been seen as fair game to be demolished, ridiculed, and killed in media since the party took rise in the mid-20th century.
Put that phone down. Get me the radio tower. Put it down.
To show you just how normal and uncontroversial that stance is, here's a quick clip of Kermit the Frog killing a Nazi in 1990, something that no one batted an eyelash at.
I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in violence.
While many have certainly dissected their politics, films like The Sound of Music and Indiana Jones aren't often discussed as having strong political dialogue despite taking firm anti-fascist, anti-Nazi stances. I think that's because those stances were largely uncontroversial when the films came out, so there's not much discussion that needs to happen for us to know that Indiana Jones isn't a bad guy for doing this. Wolfenstein: The New Order is of a similar ilk. It's deeply political, yes, because it centers itself around the hatred of a hyper-conservative political ideology, but when it came out, there wasn't much controversy surrounding its themes. There's not much of a stance anyone would argue with being made. While there are more explicitly political moments that unpack fascism, like this scene where Jay talks about his experience with segregation in the United States,
that's not the America I fought for.
Really? I was little, my mother wanted to take me to the picture show, but we had to go in through the fucking colored entrance. I wanted a hot dog and a lemonade, but the sign says we don't serve Negroes in this establishment. You're a patriot. Blue-eyed, jarhead, motherfucking Nazi-killing patriot that you are, you're still a fucking puppet to the man. You're exactly the kind of guy they ordered in come lynching time. You don't get it, do you? Before all this, before the Germans, before the war, back home, man, you were the Nazis.
Wolfenstein: The New Order's politics are relatively straightforward, quick, and potentially easy to miss. The game's sequel, Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, received a much different reaction, however. The New Colossus was rejected by many fans of the first game for having too progressive of politics, despite sharing the exact same central political message. So, what changed? What if the Nazis won World War II is a common trope in revisionist historical fiction because it allows the story to have an enemy that's completely unsympathetic? To put it plainly, the Nazis were evil, and our heroes can kill as many of them as they want without having to grapple much with the morality of taking human lives. In fact, Wolfenstein addresses this topic in a scene set in a concentration camp where a prisoner asks you to kill a particularly brutal Nazi officer. She says,
"I'm not asking you to do anything, but the right thing."
When you return to her after killing him, she says,
"You did the right thing, didn't you? Sometimes it's hard to know what is right. But what you did was a good thing. This I know."
Wolfenstein puts it plainly. There is no morality to killing Nazis. It is the right thing to do. Violence against fascism is necessary and moral, because fascism is inherently violent and immoral. The unquestionable support for that sentiment, however, has started to waver in recent years. What if the Nazis won World War II, Wolfenstein asks, but are we sure they lost? Nazism has seen an unprecedented public rise over the last 10 years or so, and all it takes is a single look at the current United States administration to see that Nazi policies are popular enough to make it into the White House. And they're not secret fascists or anything like that. They're fully leaning into it with a sickening, despicable glee.
Nazi scum.
Wolfenstein hates Nazis. It hates them so much and refuses to shy away from that fact by displaying who the Nazis were with unrelenting evidence of their cruelty and lack of humanity and lies. The propaganda letters you find scattered around the levels don't just tell us that the fascists are unquestionably good, but they also tell us that detractors are unquestionably bad, that they're rapists and murderers not to be missed if they disappear. In Wolfenstein's alternate history, Germany dropped a nuclear bomb on New York City, ending World War II, but the propagandistic news articles tell us something interesting. The in-game report cites a fictional quote from the German leadership reading, "This final act of violence may have saved millions of lives that would have resulted from a land invasion of America." This very same explanation was used in real life by the American government to justify dropping nuclear weapons on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945, killing more than 150,000 defenseless civilians. After all, President Truman said of a Japanese ground invasion, "My object is to save as many American lives as possible, but I also have a human feeling for the women and children of Japan," only to later write in response to a clergyman begging him to not drop another bomb, "The only language they seem to understand is the one we have been using to bombard them. When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him as a beast." This fictional newspaper clipping is a small detail in Wolfenstein that very clearly holds up a mirror to the United States' most violent and despicable action, and to the way that the government discusses the slaughter of innocent civilians as a necessary evil. Wolfenstein doesn't have to twist the facts or create an alternate history here to highlight the cruelty of indiscriminate violence. It just rearranges the names. Despite being about freeing the United States from Nazi rule, Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus doesn't say very much of anything specific about the current era of US politics. That didn't stop the game's publisher, Bethesda Softworks, from leaning into the 2017 political climate as much as possible when marketing the game's release. "Make America Nazi-free again," a tweet from the official Wolfenstein Twitter account reads, "Not my America." Of course, this tweet is meant for viewers to make a connection between Donald Trump's first administration's policies and the overtly fascist regime in Wolfenstein 2, but in context of the game, there isn't much specifically aimed at Trump. That doesn't matter, however, because Trump has, time and time again, aligned himself with the villains in Wolfenstein. At face value, hating Nazis has, up until recently, been seen as non-controversial, almost apolitical if such a thing can even exist. But now, a non-controversial statement about ridding the United States of Nazis becomes highly charged with political implication thanks to the actions of the president. And it's only gotten more and more pointed as his administration takes the reins once more. The politics of Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus are incredibly simple. The game makes it explicitly clear what we must do with Nazis, that there is no role fascism can play in our future other than to be stomped under our boots. The problem that the game begins to unpack, however, is that fascism isn't so easily dismantled. As we've seen in real life, it does not end with the death of a leader because the ideas are already alive. Fascism doesn't just poison full-blown Nazis. As we see, the ideology trickles down to weak-willed, insecure men. The New Colossus shines some light on the backstory of Wolfenstein's protagonist, BJ Blazkowicz, by showing bits and pieces of his childhood. The scenes are an effective way of showing the poison that is Nazism by telling us exactly what kind of man Blazkowicz's father was. He was a failed businessman who blamed anyone but himself for his failure. The Jewish population, the black population. This hatred didn't grow in the thick of Nazi Germany, instead was fostered in rural America. Nazis aren't made when a single leadership or administration takes office. It happens when the people accept their terms and agree. Rip Blazkowicz was a Nazi before the party even existed.
Monsters did this.
Not monsters. Men.
Where Wolfenstein: The New Order presented fascism as a simpler evil and only lightly touched on its American roots, The New Colossus shines a spotlight on its complexities. Blazkowicz's father was not an isolated case. We discover that the American South has been handed to the Ku Klux Klan by the Nazis, and many of its citizens are perfectly happy there. Slavery is legal again and is discussed openly and casually. For many white Americans, fascism is a system that empowers them if they don't mind ignoring its blatant evils. When asked by PC Gamer about the development of the section where we see what daily life is like in the South now, Jens Mathies, the creative director at Machine Games, said, "There was always a segment of the population who were winners in an oppressive regime, and they were willing to look past what the ramifications were to the other parts of the population." This scene shines an uncomfortable light on much of the American public. Grace, a black revolutionary, explains to Blazkowicz that most white Americans don't want to be saved from Nazi rule because they benefit from the systems that it enforces.
We've been fighting every motherfucking day, Blazkowicz. White America, though? They done packed up and given in. See, I guess they don't have the fighting spirit no more. Nah, they just do whatever the fucking Fuhrer tells them to do.
That's baloney. They want to fight the Nazis just as much as we do. All they need is for someone to show them how.
You know who's running the South after the Nazis took over? The Ku Klux motherfucking Klan, am I right?
That's it.
So what you gonna do? You gonna go down there and hold hands with them and build bridges and persuade them to join our cause? Get your head out your ass, Blazkowicz.
This is an uncomfortable truth, and one that America is facing now. Anecdotally, there are conversations I've had with white men, people who look like me, who are fine with Trump's administration because it makes their tax returns better. Fine with this because of this. Wolfenstein 2 makes it clear that this person is the same as this person, who is the same as this person. If you are not a part of the solution, you are part of the problem, the game says. To me, this statement is supplemental to the stance taken in Wolfenstein: The New Order, that fascism is a poison and anyone who helps enforce it is a fascist. So then why is the new Colossus controversial and seen as too woke when the New Order wasn't? There are two reasons for that, in my opinion. The first is that while fascism's public resurgence was certainly in motion when the New Order released in 2014, being a Nazi was still something to be done in private. It was disgraceful. People would lose everything in their lives if they were caught in photos with swastikas and other hate symbols. While that can still happen now, it's a much more complex issue because Nazi ideology is being seen as a legitimate political position in our current landscape. We're having debates about Nazi legislation on news stations. The New Order came out in the final years when hating Nazis was a widely uncontroversial stance. Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus came out in 2017.
Hatred on the streets of Charlottesville simmering for 24 hours. It started with a planned Unite the Right rally where tempers flared. Today, images like this, a counter demonstrator face to face with white nationalists, an ignited spray can you can see right there in his hand.
10 o'clock Friday night, hundreds of white nationalists storming the University of Virginia, protesting plans to remove a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. The overnight violence spilling into this morning when marchgoers and counter-protesters clash again, hours before the Unite to Right march was even set to begin.
There were very, very violent scenes earlier when I was down at Lee Park. Pepper spray was being sprayed by both sides, and bottles and rocks thrown.
It wasn't until Trump took office in 2017 that we started seeing Nazism proudly on display in the streets of America, and when we did, Trump supported them.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Again, Nazis have existed in the United States since the 20th century, but the Nazis Trump praised weren't secret, subtle supremacists.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
The people at the Unite the Right rally and other such demonstrations proudly flew flags with swastikas and performed Nazi salutes. Everything about American neo-Nazis changed when the president started empowering Nazi beliefs through legislation and through verbal praise. Now, Make America Nazi Free Again is a controversial statement about real-world political leaders who have legitimate power, so a game that centers itself around an ideology as simple as
a lot of things you can do with a hatchet. And a Nazi
is going to ruffle feathers with the non-insignificant portion of gamers who are Nazis. On top of that, one of the most controversial aspects of the new Colossus politics is that the game is much more critical of whiteness than its predecessor. As we've covered, the game highlights the idea that Nazis didn't come into power through force, but by appealing to white people looking for someone to blame. The new Colossus explores fascism's complexities by unpacking its relationship to whiteness, a conversation that many white people are still uninterested in having, especially when it's a black person talking. The new Colossus is often described in forums and comment sections as being too preachy and heavy-handed with its message because it's stated concretely without any hand-holding. It's bold, and completely unlike most other AAA video games, since they tend to shy away from making political statements to capitalize on mass appeal. Former Bethesda Softworks PR and marketing VP Pete Hines said of Wolfenstein's politics in an interview with GamesIndustry.biz, Wolfenstein has been a decidedly anti-Nazi series since the first release more than 20 years ago. We aren't going to shy away from what the game is about. We don't feel it's a reach for us to say that Nazis are bad and un-American, and we're not worried about being on the right side of history here. In Wolfenstein's case, it's pure coincidence that Nazis are marching in the streets of America this year, and it's disturbing that the game can be considered a controversial political statement at all. Unfortunately, however, Wolfenstein's existence in the current era of American politics is a controversial statement. Its ideas are far too progressive for a deeply regressive era of American politics. There are scenes and moments in Wolfenstein that I find truly hard to stomach, scenes that reflect the horrors of the Holocaust, scenes that show where we, as the human race, have been, scenes that show where all this leads. One of the most important scenes in maybe all of video games takes place in a New Era concentration camp in Wolfenstein: The New Order. In it, Jewish scientist Set Roth discusses his relationship with Judaism and doubt. He says,
"This woman, I know well, a Cillian, the will of iron, a family gone, all of them yet. Faith kept her going. I cannot believe with such certainty. For me, in everything, there must be doubt. Otherwise, there's no room to question the plan. And, this place, this is the fruit of unquestioned, ferocious conviction. This is where absolute certainty leads."
This scene is a perfect explanation of what happens when we let Nazi ideology persist, when people aren't curious about whether or not their actions are right, what the absolute certainty of unquestioning nationalism costs. And frankly, it scares me. It's a scene that's challenging for me to stomach as we watch absolute certainty play out day after day on the news. The central message of Wolfenstein is simple. Fascism is a cancer that must be eradicated. However, that statement is not uncontroversial. Not anymore. We have been tolerant of intolerance for too long, and now it twists and distorts what it means to have human decency and speak out against oppression and fascism. AAA video games cost millions and millions of dollars to make, and unfortunately, that fact often stands in the way of standing for something, saying anything at all, even when it's unquestionably right. Now that Wolfenstein has inadvertently donned a current era political message and faced political backlash, I just don't think we're ever going to see another AAA game like it, not for a long time at least. In fact, in 2019, Machine Games released a spin-off titled Wolfenstein Youngblood that follows BJ Blazkowicz's twin daughters as they fight their way through Nazi-controlled Paris. But the game completely drops any of its predecessors' nuanced political dialogue about fascism and replaces it with nothing. The game still centers itself around killing Nazis, but there's absolutely no depth to them, no exploration of their ideology. The game could replace its Nazis with mindless robots or zombies, and the point would be the same. It's a look into what the series could be if it aimed to be as boring and toothless as possible. It's depressing to see the cast of the previous games reduced to enforcing the systems of oppression they fought tooth and nail to try and dismantle by becoming arms of the United States government.
You are the head of the FBI. Isn't there anything you can do?
Gone is the biting political commentary about fascism's place in America, and I believe the reason for its absence is because things were getting a little too real. Machine Games said in 2018 that it was working on a third and final mainline game in the Wolfenstein reboot. However, the studio hasn't said anything about it since. In the meantime, it developed Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which, while still concretely anti-Nazi, drops nearly all of the nuanced conversations surrounding Nazis and fascism to simply make them generic bad guys. The game isn't quite as toothless as Wolfenstein Youngblood, however, it's certainly a step back for Machine Games in terms of unpacking fascism in all its facets. With the news that the Great Circle sold well, paired with the fact that it expresses a much more risk-averse political commentary, I imagine that Machine Games is going to stick to that series as much as it can. It's just a shame. Playing through Wolfenstein: The New Order and The New Colossus in 2025 is a bleak reminder of how much has changed politically in America for the worse over the last 10 years or so. These games had something to say, something important to note about nationalism and the relationship Whiteness has to fascism. They show how stupid Nazis are, believing that they can see inferior blood by simply looking at someone, not realizing they're talking to BJ Blazkowicz, a Slavic Jew. They said something about how a person's culture and heritage is actually a place to draw strength from by putting Blazkowicz in an ancient suit of Jewish power armor, allowing him to walk after having his body broken. I don't believe that these messages were happy accidents or coincidences. Wolfenstein was about something. It wasn't meant to be a bold statement. According to its dev team, they've stated time and time again how they thought hating Nazis was an uncontroversial take, but now, in 2025, the games are incredibly bold. I hope that one day their messaging will slip back into being uncontroversial, but until then, I just don't think we'll ever see something like Wolfenstein again. Like and subscribe. Stay safe out there. I've got your back.